The air was thick with the scent of lilies and false comfort. I stood a few paces back from the crowd at the cemetery, wearing a dark wool coat that did little to shield me from the chill seeping through my bones. The priest's words blurred into the background, something about legacy, eternal rest, and noble virtues. But I wasn't listening to any of that. My eyes were locked on the casket lowering into the ground, Howard Caldwell's casket. My father-in-law. My mentor. The only man in that family who ever saw more in me than just the guy who married his daughter. Sabrina stood at the front with her head slightly bowed, all draped in black and yet managing to look regal and untouchable. Her mother clutched her arm like a lifeline. There was no tear on Sabrina's face, not even a fake one for the cameras discreetly capturing the final goodbye. She was stone, beautiful and composed, like always. But when her gaze swept over the mourners and landed on me, I saw the steel behind her eyes. There was no softness, no sorrow, just calculation. When the final handfuls of dirt were tossed, when the crowd began to shuffle toward the waiting limousines, Sabrina made her way to me. The click of her heels on the stone pathway was sharp, deliberate. She stopped an inch too close, as if proximity alone could still intimidate me. "You're nothing without my name," she whispered. 8 years of marriage, and that was what she thought of me. Not, "Thank you for being here." Not, "He would have wanted you near." Just that. She turned and walked away before I could reply. Not that I intended to. There was no point. Her mind was already made up, and her next move already in play. By the time we left the cemetery, the vultures had begun to circle. Whispers among the board members, condolence calls from people who'd avoided Howard for years, and lawyers doing what lawyers do best, circling the estate like it was fresh meat. I stayed silent. I gave Sabrina the space to mourn. Or rather, to pretend to. That night, she made it official. I returned home to find my keycard disabled and a courier waiting on the steps with 2 envelopes, one thick, the other thin. The thin one was from her lawyer. Immediate divorce proceedings, citing irreconcilable differences. The thick one was a notice of severance, termination from Caldwell Strategic Holdings. Restructuring after Howard's passing, they called it. A polite way of saying, "We've erased you." They moved fast. The next morning, my email accounts were deactivated. My access to the company systems blocked. And within a week, I started receiving calls, not for offers or condolences, but cold rejections. Headhunters who once begged for my attention now claimed I wasn't the right fit. Firms I'd helped grow refused to return my calls. I knew what this was. A blacklist. Sabrina's doing. Or rather, Sabrina and Trey. Trey Maddox. The smug former protege of Howard's who always hung around just a little too close, always tried just a little too hard. He was never talented, just present. He wasn't good, just loyal to whoever was in power. And now, conveniently, he had Sabrina. Together, they moved into the Caldwell estate, started hosting garden parties like the ink on Howard's death certificate had barely dried. The tabloids labeled them the new power couple. Friends told me I should fight back. Some said I should go public. Expose the betrayal. But I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I smiled. Because Howard hadn't just given me a seat at the table while he was alive, he had given me the tools to build my own table. Late at night, after Sabrina had gone to bed, Howard and I would talk. Not about sports or the weather, but about structure, strategy, power. I was his student, and the final lesson he left me wasn't in a will or a company memo. It was in knowledge. Before he died, Howard had handed me an old leather folder. Inside it were a series of documents, buried in a chain of shell corporations and offshore trusts, granting me control of something called Brantwell Holdings. "It doesn't look like much," he'd said, sipping his scotch that night. "But in the right hands, it's a kingdom." Sabrina thought she was burying me when she buried her father. But she had no idea. Howard didn't just leave me with memories. He left me with leverage. A ghost of an empire that could rise again, quietly, invisibly, and beneath the surface of everything she thought she owned. I wasn't done. I was just getting started. And I knew one thing for sure. The last laugh wouldn't come in a boardroom. It would come at a funeral. But not Howard's. I remember the first night Howard invited me into his study. Sabrina had already gone to bed, tired from one of her fundraising galas. The hallway lights had been dim, the silence in that mansion so complete that my footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as I made my way toward the oak-paneled room. Howard was pouring himself a drink, nothing flashy, just a 2-finger pour of Glenfiddich into a heavy-bottomed glass. He gestured to the second seat by the fireplace without saying a word. I sat down, unsure of what to expect. "You know what a corporate veil is, Caleb?" he asked after a long silence. I nodded. On paper, yes. Howard turned to face me, one brow slightly raised, his expression somewhere between amusement and disappointment. Paper burns, he said. Let me show you how to write in fire. That was the beginning. Over the next 5 years, the study became our classroom. No chalkboards or lectures, just quiet strategy sessions where the language was money and the stakes were legacy. Howard never treated me like a son-in-law. He treated me like a student. And in that way, I loved him more than I'd ever dared to say. He saw in me what Sabrina never did, potential without pedigree. He didn't care where I came from, only that I paid attention. And I did. He taught me how to layer ownership so deeply that not even the IRS could find the sinner. He showed me how to use shell companies not just to protect assets, but to play offense, to acquire, isolate, and absorb competitors under different masks. He explained the difference between power and control. Power is flashy. Control is silent. Flash makes enemies. Silence makes money. Howard called it the art of invisibility. He had mapped out pathways to build empires without wearing a crown. The richest man in the room rarely signs the checks in his own name, he said once, sliding a folder toward me. You'll need this when the time comes. Inside that folder was the blueprint of Brantwell Holdings, a dormant company that hadn't made a move in over a decade, buried under 3 layers of shell corporations, with the controlling interest sitting in a blind trust based out of the Caymans. And with one signature, just a few weeks before his health took a nosedive, Howard transferred that interest to me. He didn't explain why at the time. Maybe he saw what Sabrina was becoming. Or maybe he always knew what she was. She was his daughter, after all, and Howard was nothing if not a man who planned for contingencies. I think, deep down, he hoped we'd make it work. But he wasn't betting on it. Don't use it unless you have to, he warned. But if you do, don't hesitate. After the funeral, I found myself back in that study. Sabrina hadn't changed a thing, probably because she didn't know where to begin. The place was still filled with the scent of leather and wood polish, and the bookshelves were exactly how Howard left them. His old ledger sat on the desk, open to a blank page. I ran my fingers over the margins, half expecting him to walk in and offer me a drink. Instead, I opened the safe behind the painting, the one he showed me how to access years ago, the combination engraved in my memory not just from repetition, but from the importance he'd placed on it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a flash drive. The paper was the transfer of ownership, Brantwell Holdings, with my name now legally tied to the parent trust. The flash drive contained years' worth of company reports, dormant contracts, internal memos, and most importantly, routes to access accounts that no longer appeared in any public record. That's when it hit me. Sabrina thought she had delivered the final blow. She cut me off from Caldwell's Strategic, from the social ladder, from every visible source of power. But she'd only trimmed the branches. She had no idea about the root system underneath. Howard had given me the shovel and the map. I just needed to start digging. Over the next few weeks, I withdrew from everyone. I didn't respond to calls or emails. I let the whispers settle into the narrative that Sabrina wanted, that I had been discarded, defeated, done. I let her feed the wolves my name, and I didn't lift a finger. Because while she danced in the spotlight with Trey, I spent my nights in that study, learning, organizing, connecting dots Howard had drawn years earlier. The man had built redundancies into every corner of his empire. Not because he feared death, but because he understood succession wasn't guaranteed by blood, it had to be earned. And I was ready to earn it. I created a secure command hub, one laptop, no cloud access, no public Wi-Fi. I activated the Brantwell entity with silent transactions, keeping the activity low profile. Just enough to show life without drawing attention. I started combing through Howard's notes, updating legal structures, and hiring a private consultant to comb through potential acquisition targets. I didn't know yet how I would rise. But I knew I wouldn't rise as Caleb Monroe, Sabrina Caldwell's discarded husband. I would rise as the student who paid attention, and the one man Howard trusted when he was no longer here to watch. They say silence is defeat, but they've never used it as a weapon. I disappeared intentionally. I left my penthouse and moved into a rented 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, where no one would recognize me and no concierge would gossip. I traded my tailored suits for dark jeans and hoodies, stopped attending functions, and let the media run wild with speculation. Former Caldwell exec vanishes after divorce. Sabrina Caldwell moves on new love, new empire. The narrative painted me as broken, discarded, forgotten. Perfect. I didn't post online. I didn't reply to texts. I stopped fighting to be seen, because that was what they expected. I wasn't trying to get back into the spotlight. I was building the machinery to control the lights themselves. My first move with Brantwell Holdings was quiet, an acquisition of a small, failing logistics firm in Indiana, Holloway Transport. It was buried under debt and bad management, but it had two things I needed: state licenses and aging infrastructure no one paid attention to. I bought it through an intermediary in Chicago, using an alias and a newly formed LLC called Harbor 9. Then I did it again in St. Louis, then Des Moines, then Oklahoma City. Not big enough to attract headlines, not flashy enough to draw eyes, but together, a silent fleet, a network, a skeleton being assembled behind the curtain. I didn't do it alone. I had Priya Langston. She was the only person I called during that entire year. A former litigator with a brain built for chess and a mouth sharp enough to slice through non-disclosures. We'd met briefly during my time at Caldwell Strategic. She represented a client in a hostile takeover Howard once admired from afar. When I reached out, I wasn't sure she'd respond. But she did. She came to the meeting wearing aviators and a gray pantsuit, looking me over like she was already calculating odds. "Tell me what you want," she said, sliding into the booth across from me at a cafe no one would think to follow me to. "I want to build something they won't see coming," I said. "Something that rises from under them. Quiet. Unstoppable." She sipped her coffee. "That's a good pitch," she said. "Now tell me what you actually want." I leaned in. Revenge. That got her attention. She smiled. Over the next few months, Priya helped me create the infrastructure I couldn't build alone. She knew which legal cracks to exploit, how to bury ownership under layers of international trusts, and how to make acquisitions invisible to anyone not actively looking for them. We built our own digital war room, coded code names, fake boards, and mirrored holding structures. Each acquisition gave us more leverage. One company had warehousing licenses. Another held key shipping contracts. One controlled regional trucking lanes that Caldwell Strategic relied on. We didn't touch them directly. Not yet. We made a point of being the shadow supplier. Their operations continued seamlessly. Their bottom line improved, if anything. They didn't even notice the leash tightening. Meanwhile, Sabrina and Trey made headlines for their charitable galas and luxury getaways. Sabrina posed for magazine features talking about reclaiming her power and rebuilding the Caldwell legacy. Trey smiled in every photo like he wasn't just a parasite with good suits and a fake laugh. They didn't know that 3 of their vendors were now mine. That the company managing their warehouse in Ohio now answered to me. That the quiet little transport firm delivering half their shipments from Denver had a boardroom portrait of me, metaphorically, of course. I made sure Priya got paid well, more than well. She didn't do it for the money, though. She did it because she loved the strategy. The architecture of vengeance. The careful dismantling of an empire without a single bullet fired. "I'm not your friend," she told me one night as we reviewed our shell acquisitions over Thai food in her office. "But I hate losing even more than you do." That was enough for me. As we closed the year, Brantwell Holdings had grown from a dormant entity into a silent force. Over a dozen subsidiaries. A spiderweb of contracts. All carefully hidden beneath layers no auditor would untangle without a map. And we had the map. Still, I kept my name out of everything. I didn't even use my initials. Not yet. Not until I was ready. Some nights, I'd sit alone in that small apartment, staring at the wall where I'd pinned maps and timelines. I didn't feel anger anymore. Not the sharp, immediate kind. What I felt was colder, deeper. A quiet certainty that Sabrina and Trey thought they had won because they hadn't seen the next move. They were dancing on a chessboard, thinking they were at a ball. Let them dance. Let them laugh in their towers. Let them forget my name. Because I was going to reintroduce myself, not with a press release. With the paperwork that made them kneel. Trey Maddox always wanted the crown, but he never earned the kingdom. I watched from a distance as he slid into Howard Caldwell's seat like it was made for him. At board meetings, he sat beside Sabrina, trying to mimic Howard's voice, his cadence, even the way he held a pen. He wore that old Omega watch like it gave him gravitas. He adjusted his tie the way Howard used to. But every time I saw him in the press or leaked boardroom photos, it was like watching a child play dress-up with his father's tools. He didn't know how to wield power. He only knew how to pose with it. Sabrina propped him up like a trophy husband, but reversed. She did all the talking, and he nodded like a loyal dog. They weren't a power couple. They were a distraction. And while the spotlight was fixed on their little empire of show and gloss, I was burying my fingers into its roots. The move with Northlift Tech was the turning point. It wasn't flashy. It was foundational. Northlift was a mid-tier manufacturing and engineering firm based out of Alberta, Canada. On the surface, they built specialty tech components, thermal sensors, industrial-grade GPS units, systems used in cold chain logistics. Most people had no reason to look twice. But Caldwell Strategic used them as a primary component supplier for their refrigerated fleet systems. Losing them would destabilize a third of Caldwell's cold shipping division. But even more importantly, it was a quiet dependency. One I knew from my days in Howard's office. It wasn't even mentioned in public financial disclosures, which meant Trey wouldn't see it coming. Priya handled the acquisition through two shell companies registered in Ontario and Singapore. She stacked them beneath a parent LLC filed under a trust account in the British Virgin Islands. On paper, it looked like an international merger between two unrelated firms, one in tech, one in logistics. The kind of thing that happened a dozen times a month. But in reality, it was my signature behind the curtain. After the deal closed, I instructed Northlift's operations to remain steady. No disruption. No changes in pricing. Keep the Caldwell contracts moving. That wasn't the goal, not yet. I wasn't trying to choke them. I was securing leverage. At the same time, I began slowly integrating Northlift's engineering division with the quiet network I'd built under Brantwell Holdings. R&D centers, testing labs, private manufacturing spaces. I didn't need them to know I owned the machine. I just needed them to depend on it. Meanwhile, I watched Trey. I watched him laugh on podcasts, sitting beside Sabrina with his fake humility and his overused phrases. We're building a legacy of resilience. Innovation is the cornerstone of modern leadership. He sounded like he swallowed a PowerPoint presentation. Investors clapped because Sabrina still wore the Caldwell name. She was the real draw, the last piece of Howard's myth. But I knew something Trey didn't. She didn't respect him. Not like she respected Howard. Not even the way she used to respect me. He was a placeholder. A loud, charming distraction that bought her time and appearances. One evening, Priya sent me a file. Internal memos from Caldwell's procurement division. There had been a hiccup in one of the shipments from Northlift. Nothing major, a customs delay. But it caused a day-long disruption in a key delivery route. Sabrina had demanded a full review. Trey, according to the email thread, had shrugged it off and blamed the logistics manager. He doesn't know what he's doing, Priya said, setting her glass of wine on the desk beside her laptop. This is your opening. One more push and the whole board starts asking questions. I leaned back, hands folded behind my head. Not yet. You want to break him? No. I replied, eyes on the screen. I want him to sit on the throne. I want him to believe it's his. And when the floor caves in, I want him to know I built the trap with his name on it. We ran simulations, stress tests on the supplier chain, financial models on what would happen if Northlift increased rates by 4%. Even that tiny shift would ripple through Caldwell's quarterly earnings and raise boardroom concerns. But we didn't do it. Not yet. This was about patience. Sabrina and Trey threw another charity gala at the estate. I saw the photos. Sabrina in silver, Trey in a black tux, grinning like he was untouchable. One of the headlines read, Caldwell 2.0, the power duo that's redefining legacy. I laughed. They were so obsessed with Howard's legacy, they never noticed it had already been rewritten. His true heir wasn't the daughter clinging to his name or the golden retriever playing CEO beside her. It was me. Howard once said, real succession happens in silence. If they see it coming, it's too late. I didn't forget those words. I carved them into my planning. The board still thought Sabrina and Trey had everything under control. But every dependency I acquired, every contract I controlled, was one domino placed carefully in the line. And soon, one flick would be all it'd take. Trey Maddox was sitting on a hollow throne. He just hadn't heard the cracking wood beneath him yet. Priya Langston didn't just play chess, she designed the board. She and I met at a nondescript brownstone that served as one of our satellite offices. No signage, no directory. Just a keypad at the door and a rotating passcode only she and I knew. The walls were lined with corkboards and whiteboards, half of them filled with diagrams that looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. But they weren't theories. They were moves. Calculated, surgical moves that would collapse Caldwell Strategic Holdings from the inside. We stood before a map of the company's known subsidiaries, suppliers, and former rivals. Red lines connected weak points. Yellow highlighted recent acquisitions we had already taken over. Blue marked the companies still in play. This one, Priya said, tapping a thumbtack beside a small consulting firm. Brighton and Wells. Over-leveraged, poor cash flow, but they're sitting on IP Caldwell can't afford to lose. What's the risk? Minimal. We acquire through a friendly LLC, give them enough liquidity to keep the lights on. But more importantly, we get access to the compliance reports. Caldwell's outsourcing their internal audits now. Trey thinks it saves money. It's our key to cracking them open. I smiled. You really do enjoy this. Priya turned to me, arms crossed. It's not about enjoyment. It's about control. Your ex-wife thinks control comes from press releases and gala invites. But real control is buried in who controls the contracts, who the vendors answer to, who can delay a shipment by 3 hours and cost them millions in client trust. She stepped back. We don't attack their pride. We corrode their certainty. She was right. Sabrina and Trey were addicted to optics. Their empire was built on the illusion of permanence. But illusions don't survive pressure. They shatter. We began our next wave of acquisitions that same month. Priya drafted the legal structures. I reached out to silent investors I had met through Howard years ago, men and women who respected quiet power. They didn't need to know the full plan, just the numbers. And the numbers were clean, aggressive, and backed by real value. We weren't chasing vanity metrics. We were carving out pieces of a throne. But we didn't stop at buying companies. We started planting rumors. Priya called it strategic smoke. We leaked whispers about a potential new logistics firm with advanced automation that was outperforming Caldwell's regional distribution. We let talk slip about executive unrest, about Trey's erratic leadership behind the boardroom doors. Every whisper was placed through third-party PR consultants, gossip rags, and industry newsletters no one ever publicly admitted they read, but everyone did. Then came Dorian Levesque. Dorian was a former rival of Howard Caldwell's. He once tried to buy out one of Caldwell's subsidiaries in a hostile bid and got crushed for it. But Dorian never forgot. He was older now, semi-retired, but still had deep connections and deeper grudges. Priya reached out to him through a mutual acquaintance. We met him at a private club downtown, one of those old money lounges where the lighting is low and the scotch is older than the waiters. He sat at the far end of a leather booth, a sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses. I heard you're building something, Dorian said to me. I am, I replied. I also heard your ex-wife is trying to position Caldwell for a merger. She's working hard to become what Howard never let her be, I said, watching his reaction. And she's using Trey Maddox to do it. He scoffed. That boy couldn't lead a lemonade stand. I nodded. Which is why I want to help you walk through the door they're building. Priya slid a folder across the table. Inside were summaries of our holdings, key suppliers Caldwell relied on, and a blueprint of our silent control. Dorian read through it with the intensity of a man reading an enemy's confession. You're already inside their walls, he murmured. Yes, Priya said calmly. And if you agree to move forward, we can set the terms of a merger where you take majority control. Sabrina and Trey won't see it until the final page. By then, the ink will be dry. He leaned back, tapping the folder. You want revenge? I didn't blink. I want structure. Dorian laughed. Same thing, these days. The handshake was the quiet kind. No witnesses. No photos. Just a nod, a smirk, and a shared understanding between men who had once been on opposite sides of a line and now stood shoulder to shoulder. Over the next 6 weeks, we engineered a dance. Dorian began publicly entertaining the idea of merging Levesque Global with Caldwell Strategic. Industry analysts fawned. Stocks fluttered. Sabrina and Trey saw it as their coronation. Every magazine, every pundit painted the picture they'd always wanted. A bold new era, a legacy evolved. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was who controlled the key assets making the merger possible. Priya made sure every detail was locked. The documents were ready. The leverage was secured. We were holding the keys to the kingdom. All that remained was watching them walk through the door we built. And when they did, it wouldn't be to take the throne. It would be to kneel before the man they left in the dirt. 2.5 years after Howard Caldwell's funeral, the press was calling it the merger of the decade. Sabrina's name was back on every magazine cover. Trey was giving keynote speeches at investor summits like he hadn't once been laughed out of boardrooms 5 years earlier. Caldwell Strategic Holdings and Levesque Global were about to unite, creating what they claimed would be the most formidable logistics and tech powerhouse in North America. I watched it all unfold from a quiet penthouse overlooking the harbor, paid for, of course, by one of Brantwell's most profitable subsidiaries. No one knew I owned it. Just like no one knew the signature asset holding the entire merger together, Axiom North, was mine. On the surface, Axiom North was a mid-sized supply chain analytics firm with proprietary software that integrated live shipment tracking with predictive AI models. But behind the shell companies and layered trusts, I had slowly transformed it into a cornerstone. Its tech had quietly become embedded across both Caldwell and Levesque's key distribution nodes. Warehousing, fleet diagnostics, customer integration, it all ran through Axiom's systems. They were the glue. And Sabrina needed that glue. The deal had been negotiated for months. Priya and I had prepared for it even longer. We let Axiom be acquired, on paper, by a Canadian firm backed by European investors. That firm was, of course, just another mask. A single domino in a chain I'd built painstakingly over the last 29 months. I didn't want credit. I wanted position. The terms of the merger were complex. Dorian Levesque had agreed to bring his equity to the table in exchange for a combined board, split evenly between both companies on the surface. What no one expected, however, was that buried in the fine print of the restructured shares, Axiom North held weighted voting rights, and a provision requiring unanimous consent from its board, which I now controlled, for any technology infrastructure changes across the new merged entity. In other words, Sabrina's dream deal couldn't close without me. Still, I said nothing. I watched the final press release go out. I watched Sabrina and Trey toast with champagne on a balcony filled with ivy and gold-trimmed ambition. I watched Dorian play his part, giving the media just enough smug assurance to keep them circling like hungry sharks. And when the official contract was signed, when Sabrina's pen inked what she thought was her elevation, I waited until the boardroom was filled with polished suits, camera crews, and smiling executives. Then Dorian stood. "I'd like to take a moment," he said, voice calm but commanding, "to acknowledge our new executive partner, Caleb Monroe." I walked in. The room changed. Sabrina's head whipped around, the blood draining from her face faster than the cameras could adjust. Trey blinked, confusion written across every smug line of his face. I wore a black suit, not flashy, just sharp. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. Dorian handed her a folder. "These are the ownership revisions and updated control disclosures," he said. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were the documents that outlined everything: the trail of acquisitions, the weighted shares, the offshore trusts, the controlling interest in Axiom North, the voting leverage. All of it, mine. She looked up at me. "What is this?" she hissed, too low for the microphones. "It's the structure," I said. "The one your father taught me to build." Trey leaned in, scanning the pages like a student realizing he had brought the wrong textbook to the final exam. "This is illegal," he muttered. "This has to be." "It's airtight," Priya said from the far end of the table. She leaned forward slightly, as if appearing from nowhere, her presence as lethal as a scalpel. "You're looking at the architecture of control, and the contract is already executed." The cameras didn't capture the silence that followed. They captured Sabrina's frozen smile. The press interpreted it as surprise. Some even wrote it off as a poised reaction to unexpected news. But I saw the truth behind her eyes. Rage, panic, realization. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to gloat. I just sat down at the table on the same side as Dorian and placed my pen beside the final pages. "This merger required 3 things," I said, voice even: capital, infrastructure, and leverage. Sabrina narrowed her eyes. "You were nothing 2 years ago." I nodded. "Because I let you believe that." Trey shifted uncomfortably. He had no script for this. No quip. No out. He looked at Sabrina like a drowning man realizing the lifeguard never learned how to swim. From that moment on, I wasn't the discarded ex-husband. I was the executive partner, the controlling interest, the name in the footnotes they hadn't read. The boardroom didn't applaud. They didn't gasp. These were powerful people. They knew what this meant. They knew the real deal had just been made. And Sabrina? She was no longer the queen. She was just a guest at a table she no longer owned. The moment Sabrina heard my name in that boardroom, Caleb Monroe, she stopped breathing. Not literally, of course. But I saw the stutter in her chest, the flicker in her eyes that betrayed her. She was recalculating, processing, drowning. She looked at me as though I had risen from a grave she buried me in with her own manicured hands. But I didn't gloat. I didn't speak again. I let Dorian handle the show. Dorian, to his credit, was the perfect conductor. He outlined the new board structure calmly, as if he were reading off a brunch menu, not rewriting the future of a billion-dollar empire. When he reached my name, he didn't embellish. He didn't dramatize. He simply said it like a man stating a fact already etched in stone. We'll be joined by our new executive partner, Caleb Monroe. That name, my name, hung in the air longer than any applause could have. Trey's jaw twitched. He looked at Sabrina, silently begging her to say something. To fix it. To pull a rabbit out of a hat she no longer owned. But Sabrina couldn't speak. She flipped through the folder in front of her like it was a horror novel she didn't remember writing. The ownership tree was clear. The shell companies that linked to Brandwell Holdings were outlined in neat diagrams. Axiom North's influence was spelled out in bulletproof terms. There was even a notarized letter from the independent audit firm, confirming everything. And at the very bottom of it all, my signature. Caleb Monroe. The man she thought she'd erased. Sabrina looked at me again, this time like she didn't recognize me at all. Like I was a ghost that had come back not for closure, but for dominion. How she whispered, almost to herself. I leaned forward slightly, just enough for her to hear me over the murmur in the room. Howard taught me to build in silence. She flinched at her father's name. The rest of the board members shuffled their notes, whispering to their assistants or nodding to their legal counsel. No one asked for clarification. No one objected. Power speaks in documentation, not in volume. The facts were printed. The deal had been signed. The merger depended on Axiom North, and Axiom North answered to me. For the first time since Howard died, Sabrina wasn't the center of gravity. I was. Dorian closed his folder and stood. Unless there are objections, we'll move forward with the final restructuring. Sabrina's lips parted, but no sound came. Not even a protest. Her fingers curled into fists, and I saw something unfamiliar in her expression: fear. Trey finally spoke. This feels orchestrated. Dorian chuckled. Of course it was. Trey turned toward me, bluster returning in flashes. You manipulated this. You tricked everyone. I tilted my head. No one was tricked. They just didn't read closely enough. Priya, seated at the far end of the table, smirked behind her tablet. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone reminded them all that we weren't new to this. We were 10 moves ahead from the beginning. Trey tried to push back, going on about investor transparency and ethical disclosures. But every sentence he threw collapsed under the weight of documented truth. Priya interjected once, to remind the room that the legal team on both sides had approved the terms. Nothing illegal, nothing hidden, just unseen. The boardroom began to accept it. Slowly, resigned, adjusting. Sabrina, though she couldn't. She stood abruptly, heels scraping the polished floor. Her chair tipped slightly behind her, caught by one of the assistants before it could fall. Everyone turned to look, but she wasn't performing. She was unraveling. This isn't over, she said to me, voice low and venomous. I stood as well, meeting her eye. It never started, I said. Not really. You were so busy building an empire with Trey that you didn't realize I was building one under you. I will bury you for this. You tried. It didn't work. She opened her mouth again, but stopped when Trey placed a hand on her arm. Not support, caution. He was already calculating what staying by her side would cost him now. That was when it hit her. Not the betrayal, not the power shift, but the loneliness. For all her control, Sabrina had no one left willing to stand beside her when the winds turned cold. And I had every piece of leverage she thought she destroyed. I gathered my folder and turned away from her. Not out of spite, out of finality. The board meeting ended 20 minutes later, with new roles assigned and next steps outlined. I said little. Dorian handled the press release. Priya orchestrated the post-meeting legal formalities. But I walked out of that building with something more valuable than title or control. I walked out with her silence, and the knowledge that I hadn't just stepped back into the world they tried to push me out of. I'd rewritten the rules altogether. Sabrina requested the meeting through a one-line email. We need to talk. Just you and me. No assistants. No lawyers. No Trey. That alone told me everything. She was desperate. I chose the place carefully, a neutral space downtown, private, no surveillance, no press. A second-floor conference room in a leased co-working space. Glass walls, soundproofed. Clean. Impersonal. I arrived early, sat at the head of the long walnut table, and waited. She walked in 10 minutes late wearing black, always black, but today, it didn't make her look powerful. It made her look small. She carried no bag, no files. Just fury. Her eyes were sharp, but they didn't gleam the way they used to. I'd seen her angry before, but this was different. This wasn't anger. This was Collapse, dressed in pearls. You used him, she said without sitting down. Your father? I asked. No. I listened to him. You orchestrated this entire thing to embarrass me. No, I said quietly. I orchestrated it to protect what he built. You were just the one who lit the match. She sat down hard in the chair across from me. Her eyes flickered toward the door as if she might still walk out. But she didn't. Are you going to take everything? She asked. I leaned forward, slowly pulling a folded piece of paper from the folder in front of me. I slid it across the table. She didn't open it right away. I let her sit in the tension. That's a copy of the document your father signed, I said. He left it in the vault behind his study wall. The one you never knew about. She opened it. Her fingers trembled. I watched her eyes scan the signature at the bottom. Howard's unmistakable cursive. The date was clear, 3 weeks before he died. This is manipulation. No, this is structure. He didn't trust Trey. He didn't trust that you'd choose legacy over ego. So he gave me a failsafe. She looked up, blinking hard. You think this makes you righteous? I think it makes me ready. She stood again, too fast, pacing now. Do you know what they're saying about me? That I lost control. That I was outmaneuvered by my ex-husband. That I didn't even see it coming. You didn't, I said, with no apology in my tone. She turned sharply. You think they'll respect you? You think you'll get to keep this without blood on your hands? I didn't flinch. I reached into the folder and pulled out another set of documents. These weren't for leverage. They were a choice. You have 2 options, Sabrina, I said, sliding the second folder across the table. Option 1. You step down quietly. You keep your severance. Your name stays intact. You'll walk away with dignity, and no one will ever see the audits. Her face went pale. What audits? I tapped the folder. 3 years of financial inconsistencies. Embezzlement. Personal spending funneled through project budgets. Trey's accounts linked to offshore payments from vendors Caldwell Strategic never authorized. You think just because I left, I stopped watching? She reached for the folder but stopped halfway, as if touching it would make it real. Option 2, I continued, is that I take this public. Every dime, every signature. I send it to the board, to the IRS, to the media. You'll be forced out in disgrace, and they'll tear your legacy apart one headline at a time. She swallowed hard. Her fingers gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Why are you doing this? Because I asked you to love me, I said, and you gave me exile. Because I gave your father loyalty, and you gave his legacy to a fool. Because I walked away quietly, and you followed me with fire. For a moment, the room was dead silent. Just her breathing, tight and uneven. Do you want revenge that badly? She asked softly. I shook my head. I already got it. This is mercy. She sank into the chair, spine curved now. Not defeated, but finally aware that the game was over. What happens to Trey? She asked. I don't care, I said. But you should. He'll turn on you the second he realizes there's nothing left to feed on. Her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. You don't have to destroy me. I'm giving you a choice not to be. She looked down at the folders again, hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet I almost missed it. I thought I was protecting the name. Our family. No, I said. You were protecting your version of control. But control without integrity is cancer. It grows until it kills everything around it, including you. She nodded once. Just once. Then stood. I'll take the first option. I didn't move. Didn't smile. Just gathered the folders, slipped them into my case, and stood with her. Your official resignation can be submitted tomorrow, I said. Priya will finalize the paperwork. She turned at the door. You won't win any friends doing this. I'm not looking for friends, I replied. I'm building something worth outliving all of us. She left without another word. And in that silence, I knew. Her reign was over. And mine had just begun. Sabrina resigned the next morning with a carefully worded statement that referenced personal transitions and a desire to refocus on philanthropic endeavors. It was as sanitized as expected. There were no public tears, no dramatic exits. Just a quiet bow out from the empire she once ruled with a diamond fist. The media bought it. Some even applauded her for knowing when to pass the baton. But behind the scenes, everyone knew. The board didn't question it. Not anymore. They saw the documents. They saw the shifting power structure. They understood the message without me needing to say a word. The Caldwell era was over. Trey didn't even put up a fight. 2 weeks after the resignation, he disappeared from the city. Rumors flew. Some said he fled to Dubai. Others whispered about a messy exit settlement, hush clauses, NDAs. I didn't care where he went. He had been a placeholder, a distraction. The kind of man who was only dangerous when he thought no one smarter was watching. Now he was gone. Out of the boardrooms, out of the articles, out of the story. I didn't waste time celebrating. There were no parties, no champagne, no gloating. I had no interest in victory laps. The moment Sabrina stepped down, I moved into action. I took over as strategic chairman of the newly formed Caldwell-Levesque entity, though I stripped Caldwell from the name before the ink dried. From that moment on, we were known as Monroe Strategic Partners. I remember standing alone in the executive wing, just outside the old corner office Sabrina once claimed as hers. It had been emptied out, repainted, and stripped of its vanity. No portraits, no perfumes, no curated image. I didn't move into that office. Instead, I renovated Howard's old study. We had it rebuilt, plank by plank, in the top floor of the new Monroe headquarters. Same dark wood, same bookshelves, same fireplace, even the same glass decanter he used to pour scotch from. I kept it exactly as I remembered, because Howard's lessons didn't need a stage. They needed space, reflection, stillness. I had his portrait framed above the fireplace, just like it used to be. Not the corporate one Caldwell Strategic used for branding. No, this was the one from his private study. His eyes weren't smiling. They never were. But there was wisdom in that gaze. A warning. A promise. Every morning, before emails and meetings, I sat in that study. I poured my coffee and stared at that portrait. Not in reverence, but in gratitude. He taught me power isn't about noise. It's about patience and silence. The world didn't know where I'd come from. They saw a man step into the top chair and thought he appeared from nowhere. That was fine. Let them think I was sudden. Let them call it luck. I wasn't here for their applause. I was here for the structure. The transition wasn't glamorous. We restructured vendor relationships, cut dead contracts, and installed performance-based models across every department. Priya ran point on legal. Dorian managed external relations. We didn't build with flash. We built with permanence. Some of the old guard pushed back. Middle managers loyal to Sabrina whispered about her return. Analysts speculated she might launch a rival firm. But I knew her. Sabrina didn't have the stomach to start from scratch. Her power had always been inherited. When she lost that foundation, she lost her footing. She wasn't coming back. And if she did, she'd find the doors locked with codes only I knew. One night, well past midnight, I found myself sitting in the study again, lights low, the building mostly empty. The city skyline glittered beyond the windows. My phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. You finally got what you wanted. Hope it was worth it. No name. No signature. But I didn't need one. I stared at it for a while, thumb hovering over the screen. I could have replied. Could have sent back a quote from her father. Could have reminded her that I didn't start the war. But I didn't. I deleted the message. Because it was over. And I had no interest in speaking to ghosts. The next board meeting was quiet, efficient. Every department presented its quarter. Every line item was accounted for. No surprises. No scandals. For the first time in years, the company felt stable. Afterward, one of the newer board members pulled me aside. You built this fast, he said, half in admiration, half in caution. But how long can it hold? I looked him square in the eye. As long as I keep it quiet. Because that's what they never understood, Sabrina, Trey, even some of Howard's old allies. Noise draws enemies. Silence builds kingdoms. And I hadn't clawed my way back to the top to play the same game they did. I had rewritten the rules. And now, every decision, every asset, every board vote, it all echoed with one truth they couldn't erase. The man they tried to break now owned the name they used to wear like armor. And I carried it without needing their approval. People still talk about that funeral. They don't remember what was said or who cried the loudest. They don't remember which cousin gave the eulogy or which string quartet played Ave Maria. They remember that Sabrina Caldwell showed up in black silk and sunglasses, standing over her father's grave like a queen mourning a fallen empire. And they remember me, Caleb Monroe, standing several feet behind her in silence, unimportant, unnoticed, uninvited to the inner circle of grief. They remember that image. What they don't know is that it was the beginning of an empire. Mine. It's funny how legacy works. It isn't built in speeches or carved into marble. It's cemented in silence, in the space between what they expect and what you actually do. My legacy didn't begin the day I married into the Caldwell name. It began the night I sat across from Howard Caldwell in his study and listened, truly listened. And now, the building I sit in bears a different name entirely, Monroe Strategic Partners. The letters are carved in steel across the glass entrance downtown, backlit in soft white lights. Not showy, not loud, just permanent. I walk the halls now not as a guest, not as a son-in-law, not as the discarded husband of the woman who once told me I was nothing without her name. I walk as the architect, the founder, the one who took the bones of a dying legacy and restructured it into something that would last longer than any magazine feature or marriage license. People nod when they see me. Some smile too wide, pretending they always believed I had it in me. Others keep their heads down, still unsure how I rose from the ashes they helped scatter. I let them wonder. Their confusion is a kind of respect. I don't need applause. I don't need forgiveness. I need silence. That's why I keep only one photo on my desk. It's not of Sabrina. It's not even of me. It's a photo Howard and I took one night after finalizing a contract with a South Korean freight firm. We were in his study, surrounded by whiteboards scribbled with ownership diagrams and strategies no one else in that house cared to understand. He's holding a scotch. I'm leaning on the desk. We look like two engineers, not two members of a dynasty. There's no pretense in that photo, just clarity. Howard never said the words, but I knew. He chose me, not because of blood, not because of legacy, but because I paid attention to the things no one else valued: structure, order, leverage. Sabrina built castles out of nameplates and parties. I built one out of contracts and control, and it's still standing. Priya works out of the West Wing now, overseeing legal, mergers, and special projects. She prefers to stay out of sight, but everyone knows not to cross her. We've become something close to friends. Not in the traditional sense. We don't grab drinks or share stories, but in the way two soldiers recognize the ones who stood beside them during the war. She's the only one I trust with everything. Dorian retired after the merger. He sent me a bottle of vintage bourbon and a one-line note. You played it perfectly. Try not to get sentimental. He was always a sharp bastard. I respect that. As for Sabrina, she keeps to the background now. No interviews. No events. Occasionally, her name still appears on guest lists for charity auctions or fundraisers, but never as a speaker, never as a host, just another face in a crowd. Rumor has it she's working on a memoir. I won't read it. I don't need to revisit a story I already survived. Sometimes, I wonder what she sees when she looks at that building, Monroe Strategic Partners, rising high above the city where her father once held court. Does she remember the night she cut me out, told me I was worthless, laughed with Trey in their penthouse while I packed a bag and left with nothing but silence? Does she regret it? I don't need to know, because every time someone enters my building, they see my name, etched in steel, untouched, unapologetic. Not Caldwell, not Levesque, Monroe. And that name stands for more than survival. It stands for structure, for vision, for quiet vengeance served through strategy, not spite. There's no portrait of me in the lobby. No long-winded plaque explaining how I took the throne. That would be vanity, and vanity was her game. Mine is control. I still sit in Howard's recreated study every Friday evening, just before the city lights start to glow. I turn off the devices. I pour a drink, and I look at that old photo of him and me, scribbles behind us, the world not yet aware of what we were building. Some nights, I hear his voice in the silence. Not literal, of course, but remembered, replayed. Power is quiet, Caleb. If they hear you coming, you're already too late. I built my empire on that silence, and I'll keep it alive the same way. Not with headlines, with structure.